dozen obscure records transformed the world of pop music. My name is Dan Charnas. I will be your host for these proceedings. When I started putting this together, I did not realize just how deep this stuff would go, nor how much work it would be. And I didn't realize that I would actually need, in addition to this esteemed panel I'm about to introduce, but I would really need a co-presenter of special talents, and that's the man over to my right, otherwise known as Operator M's.
Hello, Mr. Charnas.
Hello, how are you? I see you've got a little distortion going on over there.
I like that. It's gritty.
Yeah, it's very, I came in the door, I said it before.
You know what this sounds like? This sounds like when you're DJing, you're playing styrene vinyl and you burn your record.
Right.
So it's like a real effect, man. It's official.
So I'm going to introduce the panel real quick, and then we're going to roll right into it. Hopefully this will be a lot of fun, and we're going to try to leave some time at the end for some questions and answers. So as long as I've known him, M's over here has been the DJ's DJ, one of the first hip-hop DJs at The Beat, KKBT in LA. He's been a promotion executive for Interscope Records, and his influence known on both coasts throughout the years in the entertainment business. He's worked personally with people like Tupac Shakur and Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg. He's been a lifelong DJ, and he's hired for functions here in the U.S. and abroad.
And I'm only 23.
You're only 23. And old school at the same time. Immediately to my left, Bill Stephney was the first president of Def Jam Recordings and the co-founder and co-producer of the legendary group Public Enemy, part of their production crew, Bomb Squad. Stephney was music supervisor for a number of major motion pictures, including Boomerang, CB4, The Ladies' Man, Clockers, and Shaft. Please welcome Bill Stephney. Immediately to his left, Brian Coleman, the author of Check the Technique, Liner Notes for Hip-Hop Junkies. Really, I think, probably one of the finest, if not the finest, musical history of hip-hop to date. A big inspiration for me in the writing of my book, The Big Payback. He's written for Scratch, Erg, Wax Poetic, CMJ, Complex, Boston Herald, Boston Phoenix, XXL, The Source, and the New York Press, among others. Please welcome Brian Coleman. The guy to his left is somebody I just realized I probably wouldn't even be on this stage or talking to you about this subject if it were not for him. Louis Flores, otherwise known as BreakBeat Lou. In the early 1980s, Lou co-created the legendary Ultimate Breaks and Beats series with the late Leonard "Breakbeat" Lenny Roberts, which became the blueprint for sampled music and remains highly influential to this day. Please welcome Lou Flores. And then finally, Joe Schloss is so in demand at the Pop Conference. This is like the third panel he's been on. I begged him to be on the panel. I begged Eric, no, let me include Joe. Joe is the author of these two books, Making Beats in my left hand, Foundation on my right. And he really is, I think, one of the finest folks in academia talking about and writing about hip-hop. The author of Foundation, B-Boys, B-Girls, and Hip-Hop Culture in New York, and Making Beats, the art of sample-based hip-hop. He is adjunct assistant professor of Black and Latino Studies at Baruch College at the City University of New York. I pronounced that very Jewish, didn't I?
That sounds
Baruch. Welcome, Joe Schloss. All right. Oh, see, and I forgot our panelist slide. Look, there you can see, right there. All right, so before we roll into this, I wanted to talk a little bit about New York City in the 1970s. Basically, like a lot of places in the world, there was an emergent DJ culture and disco scene, if you will, but in parts of New York, in different parts of New York, that culture manifested itself in different ways. In downtown Manhattan had DJs like Francis Grasso, who some say was one of the pioneers of DJ techniques like beat matching, where you could, take two records of similar tempos and, line them up and keep the party going without the record stopping. But uptown, DJs like DJ Hollywood added a bit of a performance aspect to it. Right. Hollywood was really one of the first, if not the first, to basically rhyme to the beat over the intros of some of the popular records of the day, whether it was Philly Soul or a popular disco record that say they would play at Studio 54. I think Studio 54 was actually there in 1970. Anyway, so uptown was different than downtown. But if you went further up across the Harlem River into the Bronx around the same time, there were three very influential DJs who did things a little differently than even the DJs in Manhattan did. One of the differences was the way, technically, that they worked with the records, that they worked with literally what they did with their hands. But also the records that they played, the types of records that they played. So I don't think that there's anybody better to talk about what these records were and what was so different that they did with them than DJ Lou Flores, BreakBeat Lou. So maybe you could take the tables and talk to us while you do about what these records are. What is a break?
Well, it breaks down into two different factors. Breaks are usually more or less what we call the breakdown of the record, which is synonymous when the song gets stripped down and you hear these drums and bass line. And the beat itself is 90% of the time is on an intro. When you hear just a drum intro or a drum intro with a bass line that has a distinctive kind of groove. And as far as us in Uptown, we had to be more or less like a funk aspect to it. That's why it was more or less in the 98 to 105 BPM area. That's why it really was synonymous with those guys. Now, just to bring it back, it wasn't something that was discovered as far as, like breaking the wheel as far as finding beats. If you understand most of the house parties in the late 60s, early 70s, you still play the records like James Brown records were still being played. You still have records like the Marvin Gaye's and the Jackson's 5, It's Great to Be Here. All the records were being played still. But what had happened, what Hurt was doing, and I grew up maybe like a half a mile from there, was that seeing the action that the dancers took upon when that part of the record came into factor, he decided to extend it. So that's where he won the merry-go-round and all that stuff. And then
the Get Down.
The Get Down, and then that's where the whole B-boy, B-girl first came into effect.
So there were a few records that were in favor at the time, and I figured maybe you could play a few of those for us. So he's got the original 45.
Oh yeah,
right here.
This
is not Serato.
Let's bring it back to the 60s and just something that's a little more on the crazy side. There was a jazz group out of England that came out with a little bit of record called The Champ, and people like how is this synonymous with everything? This particular group, Alan, the main composer, a lot of the records that were being done in the States copied his style of organ playing at him. So I'm going to see if some people may not know, but I'm pretty sure it's synonymous with everything everybody knows.
This is what we call the Mohawks, right?
I should find the jumps.
First record is done, the breaks section, you go to the beginning of the break section on the other record, and back and forth. Right.
And then when the MP came into play, they decided to slow down the pace a little.
Right. So Lou's saying, I don't know if you can hear him, what he's saying, when the MC came into play, they needed records that were a little slower, that they could rhyme over.
And then you would have something like this. The president, like everybody else, and they rhyme. And if you see the record doesn't really gravitate to a big dance aspect to it.
Right.
And it brings it out.
So what Lou is saying is, again, when MCs came into play, they needed records with slower tempos. So this record in particular, Impeach the President by the Honey Drippers. He's catching the first few bars of the record on the left. When that section ends, he catches the beginning of it on the right. And this is the technique that Hoover called the merry-go-round.
And then, in this thing became so popular, they started taking so-called disco R&B records and make it into that gambit also. Sorry.
Wow. So what's the name of this record?
This is Daisy Lady by Seventh Wonder.
Daisy Lady by Seventh Wonder. So it was a very different kind of feel from the discos downtown, where they play a whole song and maybe an extended, 12-minute mix of the song. It was actually 4 bars of the song repeated over and over and over again, and then on to the next one and the next one and the next one. It was very, very fast-paced, just like what Lou is doing right now. BreakBeat Lou, everyone.
One more thing.
Oh, one more thing.
On the peak of the night,
Peak of the night.
you would have to, if you didn't play this at a jam back in the days, you most definitely would get booed.
There we go.
We can play Apache, you can hang it up.
Yep.
Just hang it up.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah.
Further explanation. When you rocked them back then, was it always 45s?
No. The reason I'm rocking 45s, I'm an old guy now, and my back doesn't allow me to carry crates. But 90% of the records back in those days were, LPs, or when the inception of 12 inches came out, it was 12 inches.
But like, did a piece of President even could ever come out? Or
No, it never did, but
did you glue them onto a record?
that's something we did exactly. We used to tape that onto a 12-inch or to a worthless, what we call album, and put it on top of that, so it'd be easy to be manageable or handled that way. Or then what ended up happening, our inception into the whole breakbeat aspect was we started creating bootleg 12 inches in the late 70s, early 80s. We started creating bootleg 12 inches. Like, Impeach the President was a so difficult record to find. And as far as the break, you only could find that on because Roy C., he did a couple records with this particular band, and went apart.
Right. Roy C. and the Honey Drippers, right.
Yeah, exactly. So when we started seeing the popularity of these records coming back into the forefront, I mean, I can't speak for anybody, I can speak for myself. I felt that there's no way that we should let the aspect of the DJ, the organic aspect, be lost. Right. Especially when the whole electronic aspect of hip-hop started taking place.
Sure.
So we started bringing these records out. So what we did, we had a particular 12-inch that had the Impeach the President on one side, and a record called Chinese Chicken on the B side. As we did also with the James Brown Funky President and the Long Red by Mountain on the B side. Right. So we started keeping that aspect in the beginning. The whole concept for us bringing the compilations out started with, it was twofold.
Right, can I stop you right there? Because I wanted to talk a little bit more about Lenny first before you do that. So, first of all, does everybody kind of get what a break is?
Yes.
Anybody not get it? All right, so basically it's just a section of a record where most of the instruments drop out, leaving maybe drums and keys, maybe drums and bass, but something that the kids uptown and the DJs who served the kids uptown gravitated towards. And there was a whole culture that developed around this. people who dance to the breaks, break dancers or b-boy. People who rhymed over the breaks, MCs, and that became many years later what got labeled hip hop. And the 4 song titles you see over there on the screen, those are some of the key early breaks that would be familiar to anybody who was down with the culture back then. And what Lou started talking about, what I wanted to kind of go into a little bit deeper is, so a few DJs had these records. You had to discover these records. Yeah. And how these records started getting, how word got spread about what these records were, owed in a great deal to this man, Leonard Roberts, right? Lenny Roberts?
Most definitely, but it was twofold. The whole concept of Lenny coming into this genre of music was, Lenny used to hang out at Bronx River with Bam. Now the reason...
This is Africa Bambaataa.
The reason that it is so, obscure is because Lenny was the only older gentleman that was there with the kids, listening to this music or hanging out at Bronx River Community Center. So, of course, if you see something that looks out of whack, you want to go and ask. So, Bam and Jazzy J would ask, at first you wouldn't think, who is it? It's a cop. Because Lenny always had black shades, were always well dressed, had a button-down shirt. He was most definitely, you could see he was not part of the gambit, if you want to say. So, he became real good friends with Bambaataa and Jazzy J and Islam and Better Real when he came after. So, Lenny being a lover of music to begin with, because Lenny had most of these records. He had all the James Brown stuff and let's say the Sly Johnson and the records from the 60s that he gravitated to, the funk stuff. He just took them. How is it that this music from my generation is being synonymous with these new kids that were ex-gang members and want to have a peaceful gathering the way Bam used to do in the Bronx River. So Lenny was the guy that was always in the corner listening to music and always when he was inquiring, what record is that? What record is that? So he became that kind of dude that was always there every jam. And when Lenny saw the game changing from, let's say, when we was just looking forward to getting the tape from Tape Master on Truman Avenue to being the Rappers Delight coming out and then everything after that, started seeing how the organic of the records became the electronic aspect. That's when he started seeing that, how else can I get involved into this?
Right.
So the first thing that Lenny ever did, which is 1980, which a lot of people may not know, was Fusion Beats, which had Champ, Get Up and Get Involved on one side, and then it had Flash to the Beat, which is Flash, Beat Recorder, T-Connection.
Right.
Now, another thing about that record was done, just to bring everything straight, it was the beats, the A side was the Flash to the Beat, the B side was the Champ and the Get Up and Get Involved, and it was a pause tape done by Africa Islam. So when Lenny came up to me with this, he was
I think we need to describe what a pause tape is.
Okay, pause tape is for, some of us didn't have turntables. And, growing up in the hood, all of us don't have that kind of dough to make what we need to have. So the best thing we used to do is take and emulate is, how can we stand the beat? You take a tape and a tape recorder when your mom is not home, so she can see you pressing the button up and up and down, so you can get beat up. So we used to take the tape, record the first beat, stop it, bring it back to the beginning. Again, release the beat, again, stop it, and extend it to the same way I was doing on turntable.
So it's a way to be a DJ when you didn't have more than one turntable.
You didn't have a turntable, exactly.
Right.
So, everybody here, I'm pretty sure from Bill, and so we were talking, we all know that before we became that DJ person, pause.
Proto garage band.
Oh, it's not even fun.
So I just want to give a little bit of history before we roll a little further. So Lenny would go around selling records to DJs.
But it evolved. What evolved was when Lenny started looking for these records. I wish Nick would have been here. Then he started going to stores looking for records and started seeing that it wasn't just him looking for these records.
Right.
There was a whole new generation of DJs that were coming looking for some of these records. So
Nick that you're talking about is Nick DeCrescero.
Nick from downstairs, and then you have Music Factory.
Right. So Nick DeCrescero, he was just the owner of a record store in the gallery of the subway station on 6th Avenue and 42nd Street called aptly Downstairs Records.
Yes.
And what happened is, you know, he started to buy old 45 RPM records and sell them in a back room in the store. And he started to see in the mid-1970s that kids from uptown were coming all the way down to his store to buy these really, really obscure records, and he had absolutely no idea why they were buying these records. Just to show you, Nick could not be here with us today because he has a really, really bad cold, so we wish him well. It would have been really nice to have him here. But this is a little picture of Nick back in the day. This is Downstairs Records. And I wanted Ems to play a few of the records that they actually came in to listen to.
But can I say something real quick before, you know, the reason that store became synonymous with Lion Records is because back in the days, we were all Kung Fu freak fanatics. So every Friday night, we used to go to the 42nd Street to see 3 movies for $2 or whatever it was. When you get up from uptown, station you get up is Downstairs Records. So Nick would be open late, playing music. So I guess I'm pretty sure, I mean, best person would have been described within Theodore. Theodore used to go there on a regular. And Nick had a
Theodore.
He grabbed us a Theodore, where he got the name from, I'm starting to tell you right now, was that Theodore used to go there, and Nick had a situation that if you played the game and you had a high score, you would get a free 45.
I heard that.
Yeah, you get a free 45.
What games were those?
No, pinball.
Oh,
pinball machine. So that's why the name Grand Wizard Theodore is because the pinball machine.
Do we also need to describe what pinball is?
Well, you know, I mean, if you Google Theodore on YouTube, you'll hear the story from him himself. So, you know, a real good friend. So he's the one, you know, and we used to go there. And the reason it was easy for us to go there and get the record, because we stores were open up late. Most of the mom and pop stores back in the Bronx were closed between 5 and 6 o'clock
Right.
in the evening. So Nick being able to appeal to the tourism that 42nd Street had made it easy for him to carry a vast majority of music without him knowing that the music that he was carrying there was synonymous with the living culture that was being developed in the city.
Cool. So let's listen to one of these records.
You're like, what is this? Sounds kind of like circus, right?
Yes. Well, why do they want this record?
Okay, now real quick, I'm gonna tell you something. This is the reason this record is so popular is something that we did to take a record. The record is that fast. When we took it, we slowed it down on the print when we edited it and then brought it back to the record. So people had no idea that the record was all fast. If you hear the original version of Amy Brothers, it was not going there. Yeah.
All right. Then they came in for this other record. So I guess this is what kind of bugged Nick out, is that you had all these Puerto Rican and black kids from uptown coming down to buy a Rolling Stones record. But this was why. It was this break in the beginning of the song.
Exactly. And the reason that was a popular record, you understand how integrated we were in that time. One of the biggest stations in New York was WABC. So we listened to that kind of music. We heard, as well as we heard Michael Jackson and Marvin Gaye, you also heard Aerosmith, Big Squire, and Black Sabbath.
Excellent. So another store that benefited from this tourism, as you said, of 42nd Street was the Music Factory, which was on Broadway and 42nd Street. And a guy behind the counter named Stan's last name? Platzer. Stan, you know, I remember from, you know, even in the 1990s when I used to go in there, Stan was still sitting behind the counter with this big fat book of breaks. He basically cataloged all the records that the DJs wanted, and became very well known to a lot of the uptown DJs. And then finally, a guy from uptown named Paul Winley, who had put out actually some of the first rap records after this. This is before Rapper's Delight. There are no rap records in existence. It's just DJs buying records to play at parties. That's it. So Paul Winley comes from downtown because he's selling Nick all of these cheap 45 records, and then Nick is marking them up, double, triple, whatever, and selling them to folks. So Paul did not take kindly to this. As a matter of fact, he told me, he said, I'll show all these MFers. And he created basically one of the first compilation records of a lot of these old records. And we're going to play again just a little session of 2 of these. This is the Mardi Gras, Say These and Mardi Gras by Bob James, jazz artist. Sort of the kind of a cooler Kenny G. All right, and then here's another one that the man to my left could probably sound off on.
Made real friends by B.I.G.
This is also good for scratching too. Okay, so the time before records, all these breaks were coming out. Now you, Bill, were growing up on Long Island. Okay. You were a kid in Long Island, listening to this stuff at parties. You and your crew. What were the significance of these records for you, and how did they come into your awareness, just as someone who was a consumer of it at the time?
Warmth. That during that late 70s period, and I'm a teenager back then, all these records were coming out. A couple of things. I'll start off with just sonically. You can hear a little bit of it even as we've been going from track to track. In context to the music that was popular during that era, which was late 70s popular music, like Lou said that you hear on WABC. I think the #1 record in 1978 on WABC was a song called Afternoon Delight by the Starland Vocal Band. So, and if there are no breaks on Afternoon Delight. So, in context to that sort of sound, funk provided an escape. Also at that time, quote-unquote disco dance music, mutating formally into disco, a more, mechanized version of I won't say traditional dance music, but dance music from that era, started to develop as well. So I think that young folks, especially young Black and Latino folks in the New York City area, looked for some sort of more organic, warmer, funkier escape musically, right?
Exactly.
And these records provided that. From a musician standpoint, with the genius of Mtume here, who can probably co-sign in the front row. The engineering of music also is changing at that time, as well as engineering and music became more mechanical and electronic. These records for us sonically were a throwback to a warmer, funkier, grittier era. Even for records where they didn't use drum machines yet, that were just developing, they were using, for instance, different snares, right? And they were using acrylic heads. I don't want to get too technical, but they were using on the drums themselves synthesized skins that didn't sound as natural as the animal skins that you heard on drums for James Brown and Impeach the President and so forth. So all of these things couldn't explain it, but they sounded really different. And they sounded very urgent for us.